Hello everybody, I'm Nora Burrows. I wanted to start off showing you a piece of fabric that I ordered online and give you my thought about it. So this is the National Parks panel that I think it's like over a year old now. When was this released? This was 2019. And it just has like these really cool rectangles of, the different national parks. And I think there's 60 of them here. So I had seen this online and was really excited about it, but I didn't get it at the time, and so I ordered it on Etsy. And when it arrived, I have to say I was a little disappointed. The images are all really cool, but they're not very crisp. So, for example, you can see on the selvage, how crisp the letters are, right? Here's the selvage. But then the images are almost a little bit blurry. So I don't know if that's because of the Etsy shop that I got it at. I can't imagine that to be the case, or whether this is just the way the fabric was printed, which I would find strange. But I was gonna, look at this, that's like, look how crisp the black is, and then how dull the image is. Even the writing up here is very dull. It almost looks like a tiny bit out of focus. So, the one next to it as well. It just isn't very crisp. So I had a project that I was going to use this for, and I got it, and I was like, I don't think I can use that with the project, because the pieces of fabric I was going to combine it with were all very geometric and bright and stark. Not necessarily bright, but they had strength to them, these colors. And then this is just very muted and almost like, it almost feels like you're looking at the back of the fabric. You're like, oh, I need to turn it around to see the brightness. And so, I don't know. Point being, instead of just letting this go, I went to Missouri Star Quilt Company website and ordered another panel because of the fact that I wasn't 100% sure, maybe because I got this on Etsy and not from, a legitimate site. So I went to Missouri Star Quilt Company, ordered another panel, and so I'll report back. I'll let you know if it's just the way the fabric is, or if maybe getting it from the actual source makes a difference. I don't know. Maybe some of you have this panel and you can tell me. What I think I'm gonna do with it, and why I'm excited to get more of it, even if it's still kind of just as dull, is instead of using it in the original project that I was gonna use it in, I wanna make placemats and coasters. I think would be really fun to, I don't like this black, I don't know why they chose this black and white, I don't like that, but I would cut out the images and then do something fun around the images to make coasters or placemats. So two things about the video from last Monday. When I showed you my little nook, I think there was a little bit of confusion on two fronts. Number one, people seem to think I was a real minimalist because I pretty much only had my sewing machine in there and then a very little fabric, which was kind of funny because I have so much fabric, and actually I don't think I have a ton of fabric. I think I'm reasonable, but I have a lot of supplies and fabric and things, right, that come along with quilting. So they're just in other parts of my house. They're kind of scattered. They're all very organized, but they're in different areas. So I thought that in the next video, next Monday, I'll give you a little tour of where all my stuff is. Where's my stuff, right? I'll show you. A lot of it is in my attic, so I'll bring you up to my attic, which is kind of a mess, but has a lot of potential up there, so we'll take a look at that. The other front that I think was confusing to people is that they thought the nook was part of a larger sewing space, but that nook is just in my bedroom. So I have my bedroom, and then that little nook is just off of the bedroom. So tune in next Monday to see more of where I have my stuff and see my attic, which is kind of fun up there. Also from last week, when I showed you those tree quilt blocks that I had made, I showed you a couple of those blocks and I had 25 of them. I have made enormous progress on that quilt, and I'm going to show you a little bit of it now. I'm going to wait to show you the full thing till next week when it's completely done, but I've made my quilt sandwich, I've done a bunch of quilting on it, and I've started to put my binding on it. So I'll give you a little peek here. So this is part that has the binding sewn. The binding is sewn here, but then I need to flip it over and hand sew it to that side. But, and then I've also already quilted around each one of these rectangles, and then I'm gonna quilt around the inner rectangle, and then I'm gonna quilt around just doing a stitch in the ditch. I always do stitch in the ditch. On my domestic machine, I'll quilt around this triangle and then the trunk. A lot of people think that you need to do all of your quilting before you put your binding on, and that's only true if your quilting is kind of going right up to the edge. If it's going right up to the edge, you want to quilt that before you fold your binding over and put that on. But none of my quilting is around the edge. It's all within these rectangles. And so what I did was I made my quilt sandwich. I quilted some of the rectangles, like every other rectangle, and then I put my binding on. So now I can hand sew my binding in the evening, and then every morning do a couple more rectangles and a couple more stitch in the ditch around all those little triangles and trunks and things like that. But I think these are looking really good, and you can see it with the background here. I think that it's coming out really nicely. It's actually better than I thought. I was worried that it was going to be too youthful looking, but I don't think it is. I think it has kind of like this sophisticated, masculine, I really like this one, look to it. So I'm super excited about that. And then next week when it's totally bound and the quilting is finished, I'll show it to you in full. I just finished reading this book, My Quilts and Me, The Diary of an American Quilter by Nora Ezell. This is Nora Ezell's Quilt Journal, and it's pretty fantastic. Nora Ezell is famous for her pictorial quilts, her story quilts. She would be commissioned by people that she would meet at festivals to make quilts, and these quilts would take her years to make. She would hand quilt all of them. They were very intricate and detailed. What is cool about this book is that it has pictures of these quilts, but then along with the quilt pictures, it has her journal about the process of her making it, all the way from before she started the quilt and being commissioned all the way through, you know, her last journal entry of saying, you know, the quilt is done, and then moving on to the next one. And most of these quilts, many of these quilts she was making at the same time. And so the way the book is organized is kind of interesting because it doesn't go chronologically. It does a little bit, but because the quilts are overlapping and the book talks about the quilts one after another, some of the times kind of intertwine, which is an interesting way to do it. But I thought this was a really cool idea in that one of the things that she does, let me see if I can find a picture of it. This isn't really a picture, but it's the front cover. You can see kind of down here is she notes exactly how much time each day she spends on the quilt, so that when she's done with the quilt, she has a clear picture. She knows exactly how many hours she spent on her quilt, and many of her quilts were over thousands of hours she spent on each one. And I thought about that for myself, and this tree quilt I just made. I was thinking, you know, people ask a lot. They say, how much time does it take to make a quilt? And I always kind of hem and haw at that because I'm like, well, it really depends, you know, if you're on a variety of things, right? And I thought about the tree quilt, and I was like, I really have no idea how long that quilt took. And I think that that's important to know, especially if going forward I'm ever going to be selling my quilts, which is a real possibility. Especially I have felt for a long time very tied to my quilts, and that I didn't want to sell them. I didn't want to give them up. I actually don't even really like gifting them. I like to just have them. But at the same time, Nora Ezell really inspired me in that she kept really none of her quilts. Almost all of her quilts were commissioned. And that was just part of it for her. And that freed me a little bit to think about selling my quilts, and that that's an okay thing, that it can still be part of my legacy even if I'm selling them. But it made me think about the fact that I think that we as quilters undervalue monetarily our quilts. There's a big difference between what a quilt is worth and what people are willing to pay for it. And the only quilt I sold it last spring, was my deer quilt. I did have a video on that. It's something about like a craft fair or something. You can look it up, but I sold that quilt for $200, and the quilt was certainly worth more than that. But at the time, I was just so excited. I had never tried to sell a quilt before. I had never sold a quilt before, and after I sold it, I was like, I can't believe that somebody is willing to spend $200 on one of my quilts. And it was an amazing experience. But going forward, I think it's important not to devalue our work as quilters. And so to know exactly how many hours I put into something, and then putting a dollar figure to that hourly rate. I think that, to be honest, non-quilters who want to buy quilts are going to look at that number and think that that's ridiculously absurd, but you know, then they don't buy it and I keep it and it's okay. But I don't want to bring the price down just because I feel like that's all somebody's willing to pay for the quilt. Anyway, so point being, I have started a little quilt journal, and in my journal I'm only talking about quilts, and I don't want to go into like too much crazy detail, but I do want to be able to look back at the experience of each of my quilts and kind of see what I was thinking, what was going on. So for, you know, I just have like just a little blurb about what I was doing that day, and then I list exactly how much time I spent. So for example, yesterday was 8:04 to 9:05 machine quilting the tree quilt. 1:40 to 5:45 p.m. tree leftovers quilt. That was, remember last week I was showing you the leftover, the blocks I was making out of the leftover pieces from the tree quilt. That's what I was working on yesterday. Then 6 p.m. to 6:45, hand binding the tree quilt, and 8:30 to 9:43, hand binding the tree quilt. So that was yesterday. So I will be able to know exactly how much time it takes to make each one of my quilts. And I'll be able to know on average how long does it take me to bind a quilt of a certain size, how long does it take me to quilt a quilt. I'll be able to have all that information, and I think that's really important information to have. So thank you for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next Monday, if not before. Bye.